But with that, just want to give a little bit of background and go deep a little bit on where subscription growth has actually changed. And we're going to go through a lot of data. So I want to give context on where this data actually comes from, and also give a chance for Qualaroo and Michael here to kind of present, who we are and kind of the context here through why we're kind of talking about pricing today. So Michael, do you want to jump in and kind of introduce Qualaroo, and then we'll get back on track and I'll introduce Price Intelligently and kind of go deep into there?
Absolutely. So first off, I'll introduce Qualaroo. Qualaroo is a qualitative insights platform that allows you to gather feedback from your users in real time. I am personally a customer success manager here with Qualaroo, very passionate about qualitative feedback and the impact it can have on customer experience, business decision-making, and of course, pricing. While we do have our experts with Price Intelligently and ProfitWell discussing about pricing, I'd love to just help supplement the conversation with a little bit about how feedback can help make those decisions a little bit easier. So thank you.
No, that's awesome. And in terms of our background, we're kind of the precipice into quantitative from the qualitative feedback. And so there's a good mix here with Michael and Qualaroo as well as us, because from a quantitative perspective, ProfitWell, formerly known as Price Intelligently, essentially what we do is we build products to help subscription companies specifically with their growth. The product that provides the most context to a lot of the data that you're about to see is a free subscription financial metrics product where you plug in your billing system and you get access to your MRR, your churn, all of your fun numbers, and basically allows you to understand where your business is. And then the way we make money is we sell and help people with different products that basically help them improve those numbers. So Price Intelligently, which is most relevant here, we've been helping, a ton of folks of all different shapes and sizes with pricing strategy in the subscription space for, the 5-6 years now, from, folks like Lyft and Medium.com all the way to Atlassian and Autodesk. And the relevance here isn't necessarily like what we do and how we make money, but right now we actually have about 25% of the entire subscription market using one or more of our products. And so this has given us basically the ability to kind of see inside more recurring revenue businesses than anyone else out there, which gives us a ton of context in terms of like what's happening in the market. And so that's really why I want to give this introduction here is, one, so that you're going to get some good qualitative, some good quantitative, but also to provide some really, really good context on what's happening in the market and where this data comes from. Because when it comes to growth in particular, we're living on another planet. So I don't want to age anyone on the call today, but if any of you who have been building products for 20 years, even 10 years, the world looks really, really different today than it did back then. For some of us on the call, we remember rooms that look like this. And so for some of you younger folks, this is a server room, and this is probably a pretty, terrible looking server room. But essentially, when we wanted to build a company, you had to have rooms like this. You had to have these big technological barriers that you had to overcome because we didn't have the cloud, we didn't have AWS, we didn't have DevOps, we didn't have a lot of these things that basically allow us to spin up a server, spin up a website, spin up, all types of things and start a company very, very quickly. Instead, we had all these barriers. And what that meant is that there weren't a lot of companies out there. There was definitely competition, but there wasn't as much competition as there is today. And to kind of display that, the concept that we've seen and actually the data is that competition is now pretty rampant. And when we asked a bunch of founders and executives, how many competitors they actually had in their first year of business, what we found is that 5 years ago, the average number of competitors that folks had was just under 3. And today, if you started your company about a year ago, you were looking at about double-digit competitors. And this isn't necessarily because, we're all just able to build software companies now. It's because it's really, really easy to at least get started when it comes to a business. And this is what gives us the most overused slide in every marketing deck known to person kind here, where these are the 5,000 to 6,000 different marketing technology companies, where this particular presentation 4 years ago was only about 400 different companies. And so we're just living in this world where there's so many different things. And then a lot of us react to that and say, well, we're going to be better, we're going to be more efficient. But what we found is that sales and marketing channels just aren't rapidly growing anymore. And what I mean by that is, used to back in 2005, 2010, you were getting a major marketing channel almost every single year, if not every single quarter. Some of us might remember buying Google AdWords for a penny a click, or the display network for a penny per 1,000 impressions. But today, all of a sudden, all of those channels are being used by everyone, and we're not getting those channels as much as we once were. You can see in this data in particular, 15 years ago, most folks were exploiting 2 to 3 different channels. Today, you're looking at 12 to 13 channels, but notice how that's actually leveling off. And if you were able to build a company, 15 years ago to about 5 years ago, it was actually really, really advantageous. But today, we don't just have these new greenfield channels opening up, and that makes growth actually much, much harder. We're actually finding that businesses in net, we've actually lost a lot of our power. And what I mean by this is that when you look at all this density in the market, your CAC or your customer acquisition cost has steadily been increasing. So if you were to start a business about 5 years ago, and you were about to acquire a customer for about $100, that customer in both B2B and in B2C today is now costing you about $150 to $165. And it's not as if, the channels aren't there. It's just that we're all advertising and we're all marketing in those particular channels. Now, on the other side of this particular equation is that the relative value of features or technology or just software, just things, has actually declined pretty rapidly. We actually measured for about 1 million different users using some methodologies that are kind of cousins of the ones that we're going to teach you later today. But we actually measured the willingness to pay for different types of product. And what we found is that you used to be able to maybe sell a Salesforce integration for, let's say, $1,000 per month as an add-on. But that same Salesforce integration is actually worth only about 30% of what it is today. And that's just because there's just so much more software out there. We're getting over a lot of these technological barriers, and there's just so much density happening in the market where all of a sudden that competition has really pushed value down. And to kind of make this even worse, this is also living in a world where, we still have to grow. And so, Michael, I'd love to get kind of your opinion on this as well, considering, you've been in the business for a while, but also, just from building Qualaroo.
Absolutely. So, going back to that slide, customer willingness to pay has declined over time with certain features becoming table stakes and, modernized with everyone being able to offer those. Without keeping an eye on everything, it's kind of difficult to understand exactly which features are declining and why. And so it's very important to have a system in place where you can flag those features becoming, less valuable or just becoming something that everyone can offer. I can find that across the street, for example. So if you do have a feature that allows you to then say, okay, we're going to identify these features, the value at which our customers are placing on those features, and understanding why exactly, so we can then quickly determine what we need to focus on more heavily and what we need to simply push aside and understand that is now the norm.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's now about figuring out what works and what doesn't, and we'll get into that in a number of different ways. But I also think what's kind of interesting is that, and this is kind of what I was building towards, is that everything is kind of amazing, but everyone's also pretty unhappy. And we actually see this in net promoter scores or let's use a measure of customer satisfaction. And what we found, and these are actual scores, this isn't, survey data, is that about 5 years ago, the average NPS was about 34. And today the average NPS is trending around 10. And I doubt there's anyone, on the call today who's going to say that technology or business or products were worse, today than they were, 5 years ago. And this is just the nature of the market, right? The nature of the market just means that, things are so much more difficult to make those customers happy and to find those features that are going to provide that value. And Michael, I know you guys have tons of experience collecting, not just like customer satisfaction data, but just all kinds of other types of data. And, what have you seen in the context of this?
Yeah, well, with Net Promoter Score, obviously being an insights company, we definitely want to jump on that metric. It's very important to note that even just the actual Net Promoter Score that you're gathering from your users isn't enough to make any changes. Just because you know that someone is a promoter or a detractor isn't going to help you identify areas that you need to improve or identify areas of success. What comes with that is actually the follow-up question on why you feel this way. We want to understand why you are a detractor, why you are a promoter, for example. So, what maybe there's a feature or a lack thereof that might be contributing to the score. Once you have that information, then you can actually make sweeping changes. And sometimes the case is actually around price and the value that users associate with the features or products that you're offering. So if you can take that feedback, that score, the supplemental feedback, make those changes, and then recalculate and re-survey your users, you'll be able to then make those changes that increase that Net Promoter Score. And so it's really about following up with your users over and over again And that's also very difficult, knowing that users demand more and more. So that just makes it even more important to ask them exactly why they feel the way they do.
Yeah, definitely. That's huge. And I think that's really what we're getting to when we get into kind of the prescription of getting your pricing right. Is it's you want to get to those deeper layers, because you might have an indication that something's wrong, or you might have an indication that people are unhappy, but you got to understand why in order to actually make it actionable. And I think that this gets into like kind of a deeper problem with how we react to this market. So we've all probably noticed, problems in our business, or if we've been in the game for a while, it isn't as easy as it once was. But I think what's really kind of fascinating is that the way that we approach our own growth typically isn't as effective or as efficient as we probably want it to be.